Greetings, magnificent souls, to the Lily Bewley podcast, where we have open and honest discussions about ourselves. This is your host, Lily Bewley, and I'm honored to have conversations here with thought leaders, visionaries, healers, and even solo conversations with myself about things I am currently reflecting on. This is a place where we break down, break away, and break through our emotional trauma, allowing ourselves to be healthy, be happy, and live a peaceful life. We are tired of being sick and tired. We are tired, but we are not giving up. We know that there is something magnificent inside of us. And because we are fighting daily, hourly, and by the minute, fighting ourselves, our kids, our spouses, we have to do things differently. We have to break the cycle. We don't have a million chances. We have to be happy now. We have to find a way. So how do we do that? How is that possible? If you look around at what society is telling you, they tell you that what we're doing is impossible. Yet it's happening every single day. And it's happening through the practice and the love that we call awakening the magnificent soul. We are all magnificent souls. And these are our stories of healing. Today, in episode 104, I welcome Sarah K. Ramsey to the show to talk about becoming toxic person proof. Don't forget to let me know your thoughts about this episode or anything you would like me to cover on future podcasts at epiphanyvault.com. Remember, it is a safe place, and I would welcome the discussion. Also, a request, if you are enjoying the show, please rate and share and review so we can really get the word out to more and more souls who want to heal. And one announcement before we get started today, this is the last call for my free 3-day Call in the One challenge. I would love to open up the invitation to you if you would rather feel okay and normal in dating instead of the anxiety, overwhelm, and despair. As of this release, I have about 10 spots left, and I want it to be an intimate and effective environment. So be sure to grab your spot by signing up at the link in the show notes. And I really can't wait to see you there. It's going to be fun. I'm excited. And on to the show today. My guest today, Sarah K. Ramsey, is a best-selling author, professional problem solver, and host of the globally acclaimed podcast, Toxic Person Proof. And I will be a guest on that podcast soon, so be on the lookout for that. And I know you're really going to enjoy this conversation with Sarah K. Ramsey.
This meeting is being recorded.
There it goes. Sarah K. Ramsey, thank you for coming on the show. I'm excited to have this conversation. We were talking earlier and it's going to be good. I just know it.
It's going to be great. Not good. Great.
Oh, great. Oh, I like that. Thank you for the check on that. You're starting off with a bang. I love that. Okay. So we have so much good stuff to get into today. Toxic person proof. This is what you talk about. This is your podcast. This is the book that I read this weekend. Let's start out with what is or who is a toxic person and why is this important for us to talk about?
So there's a gazillion conversations around what a toxic person is. Right now, the buzzword is definitely narcissist. What is a narcissist? What is a narcissistic personality disorder? Those types of things. I like to define it in the most simple terms that you can't necessarily Google is someone who makes the rules, someone breaks the rules, someone who enforces the rules. And if you're in a relationship with them, your job is to follow the rules. Okay. So that, because we get into like words like, man, I didn't realize I was being abused or something. And we have this image in our head of like, a bruise or somebody hitting or screaming or, that can get really tricky. And I do think those things are toxic, but that's really like stage 4 toxic. If we were putting toxic in terms of cancer, when you're talking about violence in a home, that's like stage 4. But toxic can happen in stage 3, stage 2, stage 1. And I really want to bring it to like cancer prevention, toxic people prevention, not just waiting until it gets to stage 4 cancer and like, oh, we needed a domestic violence awareness. It's like, did we not know you shouldn't hit your family members? Like, I figured we were already aware of this. So I really I give that definition very much on purpose in the hopes that we can get into precancerous cells and cancerous prevention and toxic person prevention rather than just saying, when someone's violent or emotionally abusive or financially abusive or, gaslighting you all the time.
Mhm.
Those are really getting into the later stages, and you're already really in the danger zone at that point.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it is. I through my journey, that's, I got to that point where it was, pretty dangerous for me in my really like one of my really really long, drawn out, unhealthy relationships. But people don't talk about like what you're talking about, like stage 1 or stage 2, if we're kind of going to stay with that theme. And there's like all these things, like there's like Instagram and these labels, like we're talking about codependency and narcissism, which I know we're going to get into. And y'all, the listeners, like I mentioned to you before we got on, Sarah, is that I've been talking about codependency and my journey through codependency through 2018. So this is going to be a very interesting conversation because I think what's going to come out is a little bit of my growth with these terms. But I want to start, maybe let's start at like stage 1 or stage 2, so we can help people be aware of things that, like you said, like that point out maybe some behaviors of a toxic person if they're making all the rules or what have you. I know you kind of laid out that great foundation. Are there some like specific things in stage 1 or stage 2 of this progression, so we don't have to get to that hard point in our life, where we can look out for people that maybe aren't letting us be who we are or what have you?
And there's 2 examples that I want to point out. One, I want to point out the idea of taking turns. And people have been told since they were 1, 2, 3, 4 years old in every culture. I mean, everyone has been taught to take turns, even if they were raised in a cave. By the time they went into, public education or private education, there was a teacher saying, you need to take turns. So when we think about how many times in our lives we've heard that you need to take turns, okay, yet a toxic person in the earliest, stage 1, stage 2, it's always their turn. Their wants, needs, moods, desires, dreams, money, whatever, are always more important than yours. It's always their turn. It's never your turn. And I see a lot of people in those early stages really working and, I just need to be a little less selfish. I need to lower my expectations. I need to be more trusting. I need to, not take up so much space. I need to just, say it differently next time. And we're really working to minimize ourselves so it can always be their turn. And I use that point to say, well, how likely, if someone is in their 50s and they learn to take turns at 2 and they're 52 and they still don't want to take turns, how likely are they to change? They've had 50 years of data that told them they should take turns. That is one of the most basic human concepts that we have all heard. And yet they don't want to follow that like human rule of society. Okay. So that's the stage 1, stage 2 that I think is really important to point out, because it links to do they do this on purpose? Do they know what they're doing? Yeah, they know it's their turn. I assure you, they know they're getting the better end of the deal. They're not going to tell you that. But they were taught at 3 or 4 years old to take turns. They know they should. They just don't want to. Okay, so that's a stage 1, stage 2. Now, in the precancerous cells, I have a 3 strikes you're out. That's weird. Okay, because in the cancerous cells, you kind of know you have cancer, right? You know it's always their turn. It seems like it's always about them, their moods, everything is, they get to make the rules, everything, they're always more important than you. They always get to take up the space, whether it's through them having all the answers or them playing the victim and everybody has to save me, right? It could be both. But that you can see some of those things. That's already, we're in the cancer stages. Okay, there's already data saying something's wrong. Okay, the precancerous cells, I think about using the term "that's weird." Okay, and they say something, and you're like, that's weird. That's weird. Did they? That's weird. And I think we speak in language, right? Obviously, obviously we speak in language, but we keep safe, and it's not always language. A bear comes out of the woods, and my first thought is not to say, look, there's a bear. My nervous system reacts, I get a burst of energy, and I run away. Okay, so our subconscious is faster than our language and processing centers.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That makes sense to people, right? So that's weird, is those precancerous, like your subconscious is picking up on something. You don't have all the data yet to know what the something is, but that's where you can really keep yourself safe in conversations with new people. And we're talking like, who gets to babysit your children? This does not have to be just dating, right? Who to go into business with? Are you going to take on this client? You know, people start to have these patterns of behavior. And when someone's not quite acting within that pattern, that's where you know something's off. And that is what being toxic person proof means to me. It's like, my nervous system is regulated. I'm picking up on things. I'm trusting that if I stick around long enough to have all the data, my life will already be ruined at that point, because these people ruin people's lives. And so I'm just gonna, that's weird. Okay, that's somebody I need to keep distance with. I don't have to send them to jail or, start a campaign to say they're terrible, because obviously I don't have all the data. I don't have all the information. But I think the best way to keep yourself safe is to not be around these people long enough to get all the data, because the data is terrible.
Yeah.
The data will hurt you. So that's my precancerous and then stages 1 and 2 explanation.
That's powerful. And I do actually remember, now that you're bringing that up, reading that in your book about that's weird, which is like, oh, it's so good. And that's right. It's so right on point, because if I take myself back to, almost like decades of my life, right? Like, there were parts of me that didn't, through my emotional traumas and my traumas that I've experienced, I didn't know how to even understand something that came up. Like, people call them red flags or yellow flags or whatever, but when you said that's weird, I was like, oh my God, like that is, it's like a trust in my intuition. It's a trust in what's coming up for me. Like you said, like our defense systems are working, whether we know they are or not. And, if I would have known that, maybe, who knows, obviously we don't know, but like, if it was okay just to have a weird feeling about somebody, I guess, then that would have made me like look at things differently, like, and trust myself a little bit more or something like that. And when like that, it's just, and even today, like all of the healing that I've done and will continue to do forever, and the teaching that I'm doing, and I utilize that. And like, in your terms, that's weird. In my terms, I guess I don't even know what I would say it, but I just like, there's something in my body that I trust now. But it does happen really quickly. And I think, you mentioned something too, when I remember about how our brains work against us. And maybe this is a good transition, is that, I think back in the day when I had those feelings, I didn't really understand what they were. I couldn't trust myself, or there's a lot of things happening, kind of toxic relationships, I guess, or unhealthy relationships that I found it hard to dig out of. But there is a part of us that kind of tries either listens to the person gaslighting me. Like he's telling me I'm crazy. Maybe I am crazy. And like going through that in my head. And then like, I have clients in the past that have been like, oh, at least he didn't hit me, so it wasn't that bad, or, like all of that stuff. So, how do you think that our brains work against us in that way? Is that a good segue, do you think, to the next?
Yeah, that's fine. So I have an email and an article and stuff, and I call it the 13-year-old guru. Okay. And we do not think of 13-year-olds as particularly intelligent, right? I mean, I have a son who's in middle school, and it's not like I'm like, oh man, I really need some life advice. I think I'm going to gather the middle schoolers around and see, how they're feeling about things, But if I got a group of 13-year-old girls together and I said, if a boy looks at your phone, but you can't see his phone, do we think that's a red flag? If a boy talks to you as if he's your parent, or like he's in charge of you instead of as a peer, is that a red flag? If he disappears and you can't figure out where he was, and then he tells you you're overreacting by pointing out his disappearance, are these red flags? If he's always borrowing money from you, is this a red flag? You know, I mean, these are things 13-year-old girls would know. Yes, these are red flags. We are wasting. You know, at the bottom of my book, I said not another book about them.
I know, I love that.
Love all my toxic people books. I have like some sitting right here. I have Lundy Bancroft right here. Love him. He's been on my podcast. Bill Eddy. He's about to be on my podcast. I love all these books, but they all say the same thing, girls. They all say the same thing. It's always their turn. They get to make the rules and they get to break the rules. And your job is to follow the rules. All the books say the same thing. We just don't like the answer, because we want them to be differently. So it's just like this piece of it. We could just figure out something to make them behave differently. And it's very disheartening if you have a child with them, or they're your parent, or it's a family member. It feels so powerful to feel like there's an answer you just haven't figured out yet. And it can feel very powerless to say, nope, they're not going to change. And there's nothing they're not going to change. Nope. It's hard. It's really hard. But 13-year-old girls would know the answers to your questions. We just don't want that to be the answer. So we keep kind of giving more data and more time to try to figure out the answer. And I had a friend not a client, literal friend of my life. She said, I think my husband's cheating on me. I said, yep, I could see that. You know, I do think he's cheating on you. He's not coming home till 2 a.m. He's drunk every time he comes home. Yeah, you know, I don't think this is going that well. And, you know, there were all these signs that she'd seen. And she goes, well, I'll just feel better if I see him with her. If I see him and then know that he's cheating. And I said, how will that make you feel better? He's disappearing for weekends. You know he's lying about where he is. You know he never has any money. You've heard from other people that he's cheating on you. You need to see him with her to believe it. But you see how our brains work against us. It's like, okay, let's all take a list of 13-year-old girls. Do you think this guy's cheating? They would all say yes. Right? But then our brains just try to talk us out of it because it's a sucky thing to accept. And I have such compassion and grace. It's hard. But you're already in like at least stage 2 or 3 cancer at that point. Because there were things that were ignored. And I'm not victim blaming. Toxic people are good at their game. They are malicious and tricky and they're good liars. I am not victim blaming. And at the same time, I'm like, well, what do we do about it in the future? Do I just say, well, toxic people are terrible. You're probably going to be manipulated your whole life. Better stay in your house and close the door. I don't want that to be the answer. And I don't think it is. Right? Because that's based in fear, not faith in yourself and trust in yourself. You know, so really, that's why I think it's so important to have those conversations about the precancerous cells in those early stages.
Yeah. I love the way that you simplify concepts. I love, like that. You're so right, because my niece is around, well, she's 15 now, but I'll like ask her questions and not even like, just to like have a conversation.
Just to talk. Yeah.
And they're so like, you know, you're right. Like, I don't even remember myself at those ages, you know. We can go further into detail on that with my dissociation, but we don't have time here. But, you know, I'll ask her a question. She's like, ew, like real quick. Like, it's just real quick. And you're right. It's, you know, through probably so many ways, whether, you know, it could be, you know, the environments that we grew up in, like we were both raised in the South, you know, do as I say, not as I do, smile, you know, all of this stuff. And it like, you know, there are all these different factors that can indoctrinate us to start questioning those like 13-year-old girls that says, oh, that's weird. Like, yeah, that's weird. You know, like, oh, that's so powerful. I just love the way you simplify these things. Still.
Well, I did a life purpose thing. I don't know, it's been 10 years now. And I wanted to give the world a different language to navigate abuse. that was like literally my goal in life. So thank you. But that has been very on purpose. And I just thought the language around this topic was so confusing, whether it be gaslighting, personality disorder, crazy making, it's just the language was so confusing. I thought, if the language is this confusing, what hope is there to get the topic?
100%. Yeah.
So
yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate
Yeah,
that.
my pleasure. So, and also, the points about, let's talk about the codependency and narcissism avenues. When we first got on, I think one of my favorite things about what you do also is very similar to the approach that I take. I talk about dating in terms of relationships, but it's a very inside out approach rather than outside in. And I love that you wrote not another
book about them. Yes.
Not another book about them, right? So this is a big problem that I see, and you've been in this space much longer than I have, but it's a big problem that I see with this topic when it comes to toxic relationships, codependency, narcissism, is that a lot of the stuff out there is about the other person and not about how we deal with it. How did we get in this situation? What can we do to heal? All of these things about ourselves instead of like tactical things about other people, right? So I don't know if you want to say anything about that right now, or do you want to go into the codependent and narcissism thing? Because there are some things about the way that people talk about narcissism out there that really get me, because it turns into this like victim blaming thing. And I want to say, first of all, to the listeners out there that have been following me for a long time, I know I started here talking about codependency, and people think maybe that the opposite of codependency is narcissism, but I'm just kind of wondering, like, how do you do with these labels? Like, what's your take on all this? Why it might not be codependency, and so much stuff. I don't know, wherever you want to
go.
go.
No, it's such a hot topic. And so it's interesting. Let's go with mothers and children. Okay, let's go with mothers and children, because people hardly ever say, let's say you have a 8-year-old, okay, and you're obsessed with your 8-year-old, like all your money goes to your 8-year-old, all your time is spent with your 8-year-old, you read parenting books, you this. Do people call you codependent, or do they call you a good parent? Right? So usually I mean, that mom kind of needs a life. Like, I'm not swinging that far, but as a society, right? Like, we're like, oh, she's such a good mother. She's so supportive. She's always there for her kids. She puts them above herself. She's sacrificing for them. That is considered a good mother. Okay. Now let's move and say, okay, say a woman puts that much energy into her job. She's considered a good employee. Let's say she puts that much energy into her relationship, but they stay together. She's considered a good wife. The problem is when they break up. And then she's called codependent. Well, my whole life has been my husband. Well, you're codependent. Well, if we'd stayed together, it wasn't a problem until we broke up. Right? So I just feel like we're getting something wrong here. Let's let the problem be what the problem is. And the problem was that you were giving all that energy to an unhealthy person who could not reciprocate, who couldn't take turns, who couldn't play by the same set of rules. Okay. But I get really sick of people saying people who work hard in relationships and give a lot of themselves to relationships are all bad people. That sounds crazy to me. That cannot be true.
I think what you said about this is where I connected my personal journey with codependency, is that I realized that, like, my definition was just a disconnection from myself. Like, I lost myself in, mostly it had to do with relationships, but it also had to do with job. It had to do with the way that I felt like my body looked. It had to do with my relationship with food, all of the things. I kind of like lost myself, my higher self, my inner self, why self, whatever kind of word that you want to use. But I just, like, that disconnection, that was a codependent relationship, in my opinion. That's how I kind of defined it. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I don't want anyone to lose themselves. And I do think it's easy to see in that scenario, even with the mom and the daughter, like the mom losing herself in the child.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not good. Like, we don't need to lose ourselves. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But I hate within the toxic relationship conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, let's say Bill Cosby or Bernie
Mm-hmm.
Madoff or Jeffrey Epstein or all these men
Mm-hmm.
who have tricked tons of people into giving them money, into giving them contracts, why didn't we all have a conversation victim blaming Bill Clinton and talking about how terrible and stupid he was for Jeffrey Epstein and why he has to be codependent because he was friends with Jeffrey Epstein. Jeffrey Epstein's obviously a toxic person, so Bill Clinton must be stupid. Like, no one said that. But if somebody had dated a toxic person or been in a romantic relationship with a toxic person, we're like, oh, she's codependent, she's stupid, she's dumb. Well, she's got low self-esteem, she's broken. It's like, I just can't jive with that. Like, I remember hearing about Bill Cosby and I was like, oh my gosh, like, he did what? Like, it's hard to believe that Bill Cosby, who just seems like we knew him because he was in our homes. So he tricked us. But is everyone who believed Bill Cosby or worked with Bill Cosby, would we call them codependent? Of course not. And so I just hate the burden put on toxic romantic relationships. I'm just really passionate about saying there are toxic people. We know them. They trick really good people. We need to all be unaware, because I think it's easy to say, have this little finger. What? You were in a toxic romantic relationship? Obviously, you have self-esteem issues. Obviously, you're a terrible person. Obviously, you're dumb. Obviously, you're this. We just get really good at pointing the finger to wherever it's not facing us. And I think it would be a lot easier for people to leave bad toxic romantic situations if it was just like a conversation about toxic people, or what I call in my book a toxic person encounter. And we've all had toxic person encounters.
Yeah.
So when we make it a toxic romantic encounter, we just really minimalize the intelligence and emotional health of those people. It's like, oh, okay, if you get in a bad business deal, that's just bad luck. If you get in a bad romantic relationship, you're dumb.
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, that's a lot. Yeah. It's like, it is what you're saying kind of with society and all this stuff. It's like this label of, why does this woman stay in this relationship? I mean, this one was me. So let's just say, like, explicitly,
Sure.
Like, why does this woman stay in this horrible relationship if this is happening to her? It's her fault, right? Like, I get that. And I'm 100% on board with that. In fact, it's both of our faults, right? But like that, I think it's like it's like what you're talking about. It's like a very fine line between like a codependent response, right? Which is, that's, maybe it's another podcast, but it's a lot. It's like basically what I've been talking here for 2,000 hours on this podcast, right? But it's a codependent response based off of a lot of different factors that have happened to us in our past. And it is very hard because this binary label of, oh, you're codependent, or, oh, this person's narcissist. And like, I want to talk about that too. And what was the other thing? There was something else in there too about just the labeling piece. We just have to be very careful about that. I think, is that kind of where you're coming from? Is that
I just want to give people tools that work.
Yeah.
Right. And I see people almost digging themselves. Like, I feel like codependency almost, it's like this, the hole is so deep on the ground. It's so much more work to get out of the hole, when it's like, yeah, there's toxic people. They trick people. They trick people romantically, and they trick people in business, and they trick people in all these different areas. Yeah. We just put so much more weight and blame on the romantic side of it, which makes it, I think, makes the healing journey longer. Yeah. And I would like to make the healing journey efficient, strategic.
Oh, I love that.
Possible.
Yeah. And it was that point too that it lost, but now it's back. But it's by that point too of people like joking about being codependent, which I like that that gets me, is that, because I know like that if it's real, then that shit ain't good. It ain't good. Like it takes, like for me, it took me to a very, very dark place. Right. So it's that piece too. Yeah. And it's kind of this, I don't know, it's this whole thing. It's like this like victim. I don't know. There's just a lot there. Right. So that was something
it's so hard.
It is
hard.
I
mean, I kind of say things like, okay, I don't blame you for your past. I do blame you for your future.
Yes. I love that.
Right. Like that's kind of the nicest way I can do it. And there's always this conversation about women who stayed too long. And I'm using quotations for people in the podcast because I am not God of the universe where I get to decide how long too long is. I want to be very clear about that, but if someone has a 5-year-old and someone has a 25-year-old or 45-year-old, and there's a conversation about like, I hear so many women, I wish I had just left earlier. Well, if I say that to the woman with the 5-year-old, I'm blaming her for her future. If I say it to the woman with the 45-year-old, I'm blaming her for her past. And it's always tricky for me, right? It's like, I can't ethically not give the data to the lady with the 5-year-old, but I'm not looking to punish the 45-year-old, right? Like it's hard to navigate. And the conversation around codependency in the past and the future and self-esteem and all this kind of stuff, it's that same tricky space of like, there's someone listening with a 5-year-old who needs to leave so her kid's entire childhood is not spent watching her mother be abused. Right? But at the same time, the woman at the 45-year-old, I'm not trying to make you feel guilty about how you raised your kids.
Right.
But I've also got to have the conversation for the lady with the 5-year-old out of integrity to the 5-year-old.
Yeah.
It's tough. It's tricky.
It is tricky. It is tricky.
It's very gray.
Yeah.
Very gray area.
It is. And I think like the lesson that I've learned is that choice, just choice. And I had to learn that the hard way, but there, that's like one of my missions is to help people see that there is a better way, because when we're stuck in that kind of hole that you're talking about, we don't realize, like, I didn't realize I had a choice until, decades into like, abusive environments. Right. And, yeah, like whatever stage this, if you're listening to this and there's some things that are triggering you, like, stay with us. We got you. Let's listen to those triggers. And there's always like, there's a choice, right? So good. I want to talk about two. So I'm going to switch gears to the other side of the spectrum because I'm excited about this too. Is the toxic person that you're talking about, is this the quote unquote narcissist that we see on Instagram, or that people, other people that our teachers talk about? What are your thoughts on that?
I was researching the word narcissism for some article I was writing or something, and I saw like the trajectory of literally how often the word narcissist was used in print, like either print books or the internet or whatever. And it was like in 1920, so 100 years ago, it was barely even a word. And now in 2022, it was like, it looked like a roller coaster that had never taken a dip, right? It was just like this, like now the word is mentioned a gazillion times.
Yeah.
So the gift of that is that people are talking about toxic people and toxic relationships. Have you ever seen the show Mad Men?
I have not.
Okay, but you're probably at least familiar with it. So it's basically these people in the 1950s. It depicts life in the 1950s, which we're always, my parents, my mother especially, really idealizes that time. It's like, father worked, mother's at home, baked cookies, life is good. Everything was perfect back then. I'm pretty sure we were hanging black people from trees at that point. It was terrible. It's just like, whoa. You think that was like ideal? Like, I'm pretty sure there was like 2 different water fountains, like,
wow.
What? But within that, we've obviously come a long way in some other areas. Not saying we've arrived at any of these areas, but I'm glad there's not 2 different water fountains.
Yeah,
very glad there's not 2 different water fountains or 2 different schools or 2 different bathrooms or whatever it is. But anyway, on the episode of Mad Men, the neighbor hits the kid in the face because he was back talking. But I don't even think it was really back talking, but it was like just depicted that in the 1950s in New York, it wasn't even the parent hitting the kid for punishment. It was the neighbor hitting a child, 8 or 9, in the face because he thought the child should be punished. It wasn't illegal to hit your wife until the 1970s. Okay, so do I think everyone is a narcissist that we say is a narcissist? No. Am I happy that we're at least getting better at having the conversation? If everyone has to call people narcissists to address power dynamics and abuse and gaslighting and some of those things, okay, it would, I use toxic people very strategically because it's not considered a medical diagnosis. It's not a diagnosed personality disorder. I prefer toxic person encounter over toxic relationships because that even makes it even less in context to family dynamics or romantic relationships, right? So all those words are very much on purpose. So do I think everyone who's selfish is a narcissist? No. Do I think the word is overused? Yes. Am I happy we're having the conversations? Yes. If we have to figure out how to label them that way, it wasn't illegal to hit your wife till the 1970s.
That's crazy. Yeah.
That's crazy. That is crazy. In 1950s, the neighbors could hit the kids, and it was depicted as like this perfect society. Teachers, I mean, my father-in-law got beat at school, and now he may have deserved it. Just kidding, of course, but I mean, it was my husband tells stories of like kids being like picked up and thrown against the wall in his school out of disrespect. And it's like, man, we were doing some really terrible things and no one was talking about it. It was just like normal. Trigger warning. I can't tell you how many women I've heard told their mother they were being sexually abused and their mother pretended it wasn't happening. It's terrible. The good old days were not so good. They were good at covering up things. And now we're in this revolution of like, we don't cover up much at all. Right. It's like, no, this is what's happened and this is what's happened. And so, I hope there's a swing to balance a bit as we go along in this conversation, but we're so new in this conversation that I think it's going to be a while before the pendulum swings again.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Yeah, I think it's just the same for me, like this edge that I'm pushing of the labeling, even with the codependent. I mean, it's the same. We're talking about different sides of the spectrum, but I think it's the same like labeling thing that kind of gets me a lot. I think it's used in marketing. I think that I appreciate that, what you're talking about the process. And I think it's also good to have these conversations because I from what I see, a lot of the ways that it's been portrayed, or like the Instagrams, all of the quotes out there and everything like that. I don't think that it's making, it's helping people have agency, I guess, because it makes it but it's the same way with the codependent side of things. So I just want to point that out. I think it's, what we're talking about here, and we both have the same approach, which I think is awesome because we're talking about what we're doing on the inside with all this information, right? And these patterns that we see, does it serve us to even label ourselves as a codependent and the other person, the narcissism, or does it serve ourselves better by checking in with ourselves and say like, oh, that's weird. And like, how many times did that happen in 1 week? Right. So yeah, good conversation.
And all that matters is, how is next year going to be better? And if you need to study narcissism to make sense of what happened to you for a season, do not do it forever. If your toxic relationship was all about the narcissist, quote unquote, as we were talking about labels,
Yeah.
and then you read every book that's ever existed on narcissism for a season. That's processing. Do not live there forever. Do not live there forever. Do not live there forever. Because if the toxic relationship was all about them and your healing process is all about them, I've never heard of anyone say, gosh, I just know everything there is to know about narcissism now. I'm so happy. Like, that is not happiness. That is not joy. That is not healthy relationships. That is processing trauma, which is a part of the journey. It is not the last leg. And it can become its own quote. I don't like to use the word addiction and again, as we're talking about codependency, narcissism labels, these are none of the words I use typically, but it can become its own obsession. I'm happy to use that word, right?
Yeah,
You're
100%.
obsessed with them, making them happy, walking on eggshells, figuring out how to please them or avoid their wrath, whatever. And then your healing strategy is also obsessed with them.
100%.
And not the way to go long term. It's part of the process. We all went through it. Not the ending.
Thank you for putting that signpost there, because that's been my journey for sure. I think I'll tell you, I'll be honest, I didn't dwell very long in the victim side of things, and I'm proud of that. Like, I claimed my power pretty quickly. But like at the beginning when I started this work, as like I'm a coach as well. And at the beginning when I started this work, people would come in, like slide into my DMs, like, how do I make him blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
How do I make him, I don't even know, like insert example here.
Sure.
Eventually I stopped getting those messages. I don't know if that was the universe or whatever, what have you, or like energetic boundaries that I was putting out there about how I was communicating about it. So I'm just curious, do you still get those? Like, what do you say to these people? Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And that's why I purposely use the example of taking turns, because then it's so easy. Like, okay, at 3 years old, he was taught to take turns. At 33 years old, he still doesn't know how to take turns. What do you think the likelihood of him changing is? Do you think he knows what he's doing? Right. And that's why I like to use those examples so much. So I think what's hardest is when I see people trying to co-parent or parallel parent or whatever. They have kids with this person, they're divorced, they're out of the relationship, but then it's like, well, how do I get him to this? And it is just such a precious, terrible, scary thing to just say, well, you can't worry about him, you got to worry about you, and it's like, it's so tangled and so important. So in that case, I really have developed the language around asking people what problem they're trying to solve. Okay. So I love to tell this story. There is a lady who, 2 stories on her. She had a very young child, like a 3-year-old, right? And so to say to a mom, don't worry about what he's doing to your 3-year-old, like, that's just not, like, that's not a thing. Like, that cannot be, and so one time he bought a basketball goal, or she bought a basketball goal. He said he would pay her for the basketball goal, and he didn't. And I said, okay, so he owes you $300 for this basketball goal, and he's not paying you. But he said he would. He should pay. He should. I'm going to stand up for him. I'm going to show him he can't walk all over me. Okay. It's like, awesome. And aren't you in sales? And she said, yeah. I said, so how much time have you spent arguing over the $300? And she goes, a lot. I said, if you'd spent all that time prospecting, how much money could you have made? And it was several thousand. Okay. So in the context of boundaries, sticking up for yourself, not letting people walk all over you, again, let's talk strategy. I think even the conversation around boundaries is really lacking. That's why it's like, okay, what problem are you trying to solve? Having $300, not making him give you the $300. If you want $300 more, there's a million ways this woman could do that. She's very successful professionally. But let the problem be getting back the $300, not making him do the right thing.
Right. Yep. Exactly.
And that's something I call around the house.
Yes.
And the strategies, like, going, if the party's in the backyard, you're at the front door knocking, hoping the toxic person will open it.
Say that again. Can you explain around the house?
Party's in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So her getting the $300 is in the backyard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
She's at the front door knocking, saying, "Hey, ex-husband, will you pay me the money you promised?"
Mm-hmm.
But he's in control of opening the door.
Mm-hmm.
If she stops trying to go through the front door and goes around the house to the backyard, she can still get what she wants if what she wants is not getting him to do the right thing.
That's powerful.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And that same woman had a situation that she was like, "I don't think he's feeding my son. I'm worried about my son having food." And I said, "Does the son have like a backpack or anything that goes between houses?" And she goes, "Yes, he has a little backpack from school." And I said, "Can you put granola bars and some snacks in that backpack, so whenever he's going to the dad's house, you at least know that he has food that he can get access to?" Right? That's another around the house, because, it's like the dad should feed him. Yes, he should. He should do the right thing. And we're talking about feeding your child. Like my empathy and my heart on this is so big, but so many people like try to be good listeners. "Gosh, that's so unfair. He shouldn't do that. What kind of dad does that? You need to call your lawyer. You need to do this," right? And it's like, well, if she contacts a lawyer, maybe in 9 months, she'll have a court date where there's some type of regulation on the child eating. And it's been 9 months of her being scared and the kid not having food. Right? And so I think that's where around the house is so important in that conversation, because if we're trying those DMs, how do I get him to blank? Just take your phone, break it on the floor, beat your head against the wall, like just try to make yourself as miserable as possible, because that's about that's how you get them. There's no getting them to do the right thing.
Yeah. I love that. Ooh, that just hits home, and it's something that I've been doing without even having any, this happens obviously through healing and self-awareness and all that stuff, but what is like what you're saying, what is the real problem that you were trying to solve? And if it does have something to do with another person's actions, another person's thoughts, another person's emotions, another person's behavior, like, is that realistic? Is that for real? Like, do you have any control over that? And what problem can you solve for that you do have control over? Right.
Yeah. First question.
So good.
What problem are you trying to solve? This is my second book, by the way. That's
I
just turned to my
we're
editor.
letting the cat out of the bag. Okay.
Yeah. So my first book, What Problem You're Trying to Solve. Second book, Is This Your Problem to Solve? Thank you. Right. That's the second question. Oh, whoa, this is not my problem to solve. Okay. What is a problem I can solve? And you can almost always get what you want other than the toxic person changing. You can have anything you want. You can get that $300. You had $3,000 that week. Mm-hmm. You can do anything other than getting them to change. That. Period.
Woo. Woo. So good. We should end on that. Thank you so much for your time. I feel like we could go on forever. And it's just, like I said, I really love the way that you have kind of narrowed in on these really important points that people don't talk about. And I'm proud, to bring that here to listeners. What are you working on right now? And where can people find the book, all that good stuff?
Yeah. So if they Google toxic person proof, like bulletproof, toxic person proof, you're going to see my book. You're going to see my website. You're going to see my podcast, the Toxic Person Proof podcast. And those are the main things. I have a webinar. If you want me to put that in the show notes, I can, give that to people. It's, I'm really big into strategies, strategies, not stories, strategies. And so many people, it's like, oh, I just want to, it's about telling my story, which is fine. I want to change your story. I want to change your story. That woman could say, I've just really try to come peace with the fact that my kid doesn't have food, or she could get her kid food. Like, I want to change the story.
I love that.
And so that's what I'm. But my next book, my next adventure is going to be on that decision making and problem solving process that has helped so many of my clients get unstuck. It's not just about toxic people. It's just really about solving really complicated problems.
Mm-hmm.
And toxic people problems just happen to be very complicated. So
Mm-hmm.
that's really what it's about, is solving problems.
I love that. Yeah. And I love this conversation, and you're amazing. Thank you for coming.
Oh, thank you for having me, Lily.
It's my pleasure. Thank you. This conversation with Sarah K. Ramsey was one I wanted to have. I've been wanting to have for a while now. My journey, as you know, dear listener, that have been here, since 2018, maybe thousands of hours under our belts at this time, spending time together. It's a conversation I wanted to have about these labels of codependency and narcissism. I really don't think we went that deep in the conversation. In fact, I might actually want to have her back at some point, or maybe if you want me to talk about that, let me know at the Epiphany Vault, and I'd be happy to expand more in a regular podcast episode. But something I've learned in my journey, I started talking about codependency here. Like, the first episode is what is codependency? And I've realized that a label can be useful at some points in our journey. I think Sarah K did talk about that, but can also be used in a sense of disempowerment, maybe from both sides. I've seen it on the codependent side of things, when people use codependency as a label of maybe like victimization or giving up. And let me just say this too. This is my view on this now is a little bit different, I must say. I've grown since then, and I will continue to grow. And this conversation does not diminish any of the abuse that you have suffered, doesn't diminish any of the hurt and the heartache and the pain that you've been through. I've been there, and I understand. And I know how maybe something like this can be triggering, and that's okay. And I want to hold you in that trigger and that uncomfortability for right now. But even, a label of codependency, for example, it can take us to a place of like giving up. I was there. The last relationship that I was in, the, I guess, quote unquote, toxic relationship that I was in, I resigned myself that this was just the life that I was meant to lead. I was following the path of my parents in my relationship. And that did not give me any power. It didn't give me any power to change. It didn't give me any power of choice. It didn't give me any power of maybe even, I always say there is a better way. There is always a better way. When we were stuck in these holes of trauma and abuse, of overthinking, of judgment, of anxiety, of overwhelm, all the things, we don't see the light, right? So if you're there, if you've been there, I understand. On the other end of the spectrum, the narcissistic tendencies, qualities, and labels is also just a label. Most marketing out there, most people that talk about narcissism put them as the villain, the big bad wolf, and that sells. Let's be real. I want to kind of break the pattern a little bit, and it sells. You see people in groups in Facebook all over the place, and again, this is not, I want to say this again, this is not to diminish the hurt and the pain that people in this category or on this spectrum causes. I know. But the narcissism label hurts us as well. It gives them power. It gives them agency over the choices that we have as individuals in our lives. And I'm feeling like I can go on a rant right now, so I'm going to hold up there. I would love if you want to hear more about this, because I'm not sure if it's relevant to you as a listener, as an audience. Go into the Epiphany Vault or drop me a DM on Instagram and let me know that if this is something you want me to discuss more about on my own. I'd be happy to. It's a new evolution and revolution that I've come to through my metamorphosis of healing. And going back to the interview with Sarah K. Ramsey, I love how and I said this in the show, I love how she simplifies these complex problems in relationship. It's goals really for me. And I actually think that's something that I do very well. And it's mind blowing to me how she simplifies these like big complex relational problems from an internal perspective. And this conversation was really good. And like I said, I will be a guest on her podcast too. So feel free to make sure to follow me on Instagram to catch up on all the dates on that too. You'll see me as guesting on more podcasts here as the year goes on. But I love y'all. I want you to know that you're perfect the way you are. You are not broken. You don't need to be fixed. You make sense. Things that are happening with you in your life make a lot of sense. And there is always a better way. There is a better way. And if that's frustrating for you, I understand. And I want you to know from someone who has healed a lot and will continue to heal and helps other people heal. When we're stuck in our trauma and stuck in our hole of withdrawal and isolation, we don't see that. And I want to shed just a little bit of light into where you are right now. I love you. Thanks for being here.